Welcome everyone to AURI Connects Fields of Innovation, part of AURI Connects monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. I'm Dan Scogan, AURI's Director of Industry and Government Relations, and your host for Fields of Innovation. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. Fields of Innovation is focused on bringing together Minnesota's regional ag and food value chains to build capacity and successfully commercialize new and emerging crops. Events will focus on highlighting new crops, examining marketing opportunities for emerging crops, and highlighting new technologies in existing crops. Remember that this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Today on Fields of Innovation, we will have a discussion about the Plant-Based Food Association. The Plant-Based Foods Association, or PBFA, is one of the leaders in identifying and building new opportunities in the plant-based foods industry. Remember, participants are muted, but you can ask questions through our Q&A portal on your screen. To get us started today, we welcome AURI Executive Director Shannon Schlecht in his role as Executive Director. Shannon is responsible for the overall strategic and operational oversight of the organization's staff, programs, and its execution of its mission. Shannon Schlecht, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dan, for that introduction, and welcome everyone to today's event. Very excited to have the Plant-Based Foods Association with us to share insight and opportunities in this exciting sector. Just for background, AURI has been around for 30 years as a nonprofit corporation, looking at ways that we can accelerate ideas to the marketplace, de-risk new ideas, and create new opportunities that benefit the agricultural industry. We support Minnesota agriculture through our work with producers and entrepreneurs, small businesses, and even our collaborations with our legacy food and agricultural companies spread across the state and across the region. As I thought about today, just information that continues to come across my desk relate to protein and fiber, right? These are two very highly sought after attributes from consumers. And I think plants have both of these attributes. And I think is one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of interest in the plant-based food space. And I think we'll hear more about that today as well. And we hear a lot about plant-based proteins. I don't think I can go a day without a headline around plant-based proteins. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, as well. But it will also be a broader encompassing conversation on different plant-based foods. With Minnesota being such a diverse state, both plant-based and crops as well as livestock are just so important to our agricultural industry. Minnesota has a vibrant activity in both of these different areas. But with that, we're also, I want to just say that today we're going to focus on plant-based because we're seeing such high market growth potential and opportunities in this space. And I think it's going to be really interesting to hear about what some of those drivers are in terms of that are driving consumers to the space, right, through either fiber and protein that I mentioned earlier, as well as sustainability factors, right, that are really influencing a lot of decisions from our diet and what consumers are seeking. With that, Minnesota does have some great activity in this space. I think many people maybe saw that Purus was just named one of the top 10 innovative food companies by Fast, and it was great to see them listed and to see their leadership in this space as well. And we're also seeing interest in plant-based from right across the spectrum, from our entrepreneurial community to our legacy companies. So we're really excited to host this conversation today, to learn more, to look at opportunities for the agricultural industry, as well as for the state of Minnesota and for our region in terms of what's going on, what are things that we should be thinking about, and how can we move some of these great ideas forward and into the marketplace, which is where AURI really spends its time in terms of turning those ideas into new market realities. So with that, again, I'm very pleased to have our esteemed guest from the Plant-Based Foods Association, Dan, and I'll turn it back to you for the next set of introductions and to continue our program.
All right, Shannon, thank you very much. And now to lead our discussion around the Plant-Based Food Association, please welcome Julie Emmett and Carl Jorgensen. Julie Emmett is Senior Director, Retail Partnerships for the Plant-Based Foods Association. Julie collaborates with retailers and industry partners on behalf of the PBFA members by leading a multitude of groundbreaking initiatives to grow plant-based foods including merchandising research, industry landscape reports, and retailer-specific marketing and culinary events. Carl Jorgensen is agriculture consultant for the Plant-Based Foods Association and provides independent consulting services to a range of brands, manufacturers, and investment companies who are working in the natural products field. Carl has held a number of leadership roles in the agri-food industry since 1955. Julie Emmett and Carl Jorgensen, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, to be a part of the great work that we're doing, really around the brand farmer connection. We're using research, we're using data to inform research, to leverage the opportunity that this provides, that plant-based food provides, and namely domestic sourcing for plant-based foods ingredients. This is a way to efficiently and profitably grow the consumer demand and meet the consumer demand of plant-based foods, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So first I'll provide an overview of PBFA and then talk about how and why plant-based foods are growing. And then I'll turn it over to Carl to speak specifically about the data that we're using to convert retail sales to the acres needed to meet the demand. So a little bit about PBFA. PBFA is the only trade membership association for plant-based foods in the US. And we exist to build a strong foundation for the plant-based foods industry to succeed and to thrive. We are now 170, excuse me, we are comprised of 197 companies that make plant-based food. And in addition to those members, we have investors, we have affiliate members, ingredient suppliers. So our total membership is a little over 300. You can see our board members here, their logos. We're very, very proud of the work that our organization does, our members and our board members. They're very involved in the industry, supporting the industry as a whole in the areas of policy and diversity, equity, and inclusion, building task force to support the community. So we're really proud of our membership and our board members. Pardon me. So we're active in two main areas, and that's policy and consumer access. So in the area of policy is really the cornerstone from which PBFA was founded. We have representation at both the state and federal level. I'm going to refer to my notes to make sure that this is not my area of expertise, but I just want to make sure I get it right because there's so much great work that's being done in the area of policy. So we're continuing to address the labeling bills and laws at both, again, the state and federal level that prohibit brands from using the terms or words meat and dairy on their labels, despite the fact that there's qualifiers to make it clear that it is a plant-based product. Our goal is to really support consumers to make it easy for them to find it and to have confidence in what they're buying. So PBFA is actively working to defend these bills. There are active bills now in Texas, Wisconsin, Kansas, and New York. PBFA's work is also proactive. In addition to expanding USDA dietary guidelines to include plant-based foods, PBFA will be commenting to the USDA on the link between food and climate change and the positive impacts of a plant-based diet, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. PBFA will also be asking the USDA to include plant-based foods in USDA-funded feeding programs. So it's the National School Lunch and Breakfast Programs, Child and Adult Care Feeding Programs, Summer Food Service Programs, Women, Infants, and Children, WIC programs, among many others. We are also seeking to reform the commodity checkoff programs. And then lastly, PBFA launched the Certified Plant-Based Certification at the end of 2018. And that really helps the industry define plant-based foods, have a common understanding of what plant-based foods are, and then also make it easier for shoppers to find it and have assurance of what they're buying. So in the area of consumer access, and that's the area that I'm most involved with, consumer access includes both retail as well as food service. My colleague, Sabina Vyas, manages our food service work, and that involves building strong relationships with, excuse me, I woke up with a tickle this morning, so please bear with me. Distributors and brokers, culinary chef training, a slew of activities to support the food service industry, and of course support it as they come back into the environment. With regard to retail, so really the reason, what do we do? Why do we do what we do? And really, the plant-based foods industry needs more from retailers to support the increased demand. And the great news is that retailers are very excited to find solutions through working with PBFA. So we've developed really strong relationships. I mean, that is our goal, to build strong relationships with retailers on behalf of our members to create multifaceted solutions. So all of our work is based in data. We work with SPINS as our data provider. We take their raw data and we code it based on the definition of plant-based foods, which is foods derived from plants that replace an animal product. And we do that to be able to demonstrate across the industry, so we're all, again, a common understanding of the size and growth of plant-based foods in and of itself, as well as by category, by key category, and those categories continue to grow, which we'll talk about. We've also conducted research. We had a pretty significant project last year with Kroger. We conducted a research study, a control store test, where we placed all plant-based meat, not just the burgers and fresh, but also packaged meat, all into one section. And we're able to not only measure the sales increase, the control stores versus the test stores, but also conduct in-depth interviews to understand, what did this mean to shoppers? Was this something that they desired? Was it what they expected? And we saw tremendous growth, especially in the Midwest. We saw within Indiana and Illinois, the 30 stores, the control store test that we had there, that there was an increase of 32% of that control store test that had all of the products together, because that's where shoppers were expecting to find them. A key effort of our retail work is education, in many forms like this, or we're often invited into retail headquarters to present to their buying teams. It's a very much of a give and take. We learn from them, we help educate, and really help them shape their plant-based food strategy. And that can come in many forms of solutions for that. It can be integrated marketing events, training of their staff to help them understand plant-based foods and the opportunity and how to converse with shoppers. Merchandising solutions like the one that we just talked about, or there's many other. Merchandising as an all-encompassing where to place them, what to place in the stores. And then events. We had a really great event last year with Kroger. It was an internal veg fest. It was educating their employees, and it was really great. We had Miyoko come and do a live cooking demonstration. We had our brands be able to showcase themselves, and we were able to share insights. And so we'd like to continue to expand that work. And the really key part of our work is the media. We have a really solid relationship with the media, and we're able to highlight the thought leadership that we're seeing with retailers, giving them their much deserved attention for all the work that they're doing, and then of course to inform and to inspire the rest of the industry to do the same. And then ultimately our goal is just to increase access and expand plant-based foods. And who do we work with? We work with many retailers. You can see, many of the top retailers that we're working with. This is not an exhaustive list, but our key partners. But we also work with the Good Food Institute. We work with NSF, who is our third-party certifier for the certification. Plant-Based World, many different industry partners, which a lot of great work has come from that. Okay, diving into the information. So what are plant-based foods? Plant-based foods are, again, foods derived from plants that are direct replacements for meat, poultry, egg, dairy products. And you can see an example of many of those products here. It has grown. We've grown from, I think when we first started tracking this a few years ago, from 6 or 7 categories to now over 30 different categories across the store. So now we'll take a broader look of total plant-based food. So this information is through the end of October of last year. We're about to publish 2020 numbers, very exciting. So plant-based foods, as we know, experiencing astronomical growth. Just 52 weeks ending the October timeframe, up 28%. The year ending 2019, plant-based food sales were already 5 times total store sales. They began the year up even stronger in 2020. And then the pandemic hit, of course. So we're all total store sales have been increasing significantly, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But you can see some of the key categories here. So milk represents almost half of all plant-based food sales. Very developed category, has almost a 15% share of total milk, very significant. In a natural store environment, that share is almost half of total milk sales. That's followed by meat. Percentage is 26%. Then you see the other categories: desserts, creamer, yogurt, cheese, all really gaining that share. They're growing their share consistently and providing just more and more opportunity. Like I said, now there's over 30 categories. So as I was saying, so as we entered 2020, it was a little stronger than the end of 2019, and then in March the panic buying began. And so as part of our ongoing effort to educate the industry, many media outlets picked up this press release that PBFA published to really understand not just a point in time. There was a lot of information shared that this one particular week was up 300%. We really wanted to see over time what was happening to plant-based foods. So you can see that the green line is plant-based food growth, and the blue line is total food sales. So after the panic buying period in March, you can see that the total store sales growth started to come back down to normal. So this is growth, not volume, coming back down to normal. But you can see that plant-based food sales continue to increase after this time. So what we're finding in more recent time period for this year, there was some research conducted that was very telling in terms of how consumer adoption is just continuing to grow and was really accelerated by the pandemic. So according to this research, 77% of shoppers in the United States have purchased a plant-based meat alternative in the past 6 months. This was conducted in June. That's a very significant number of people that have tried plant-based foods. 30% of those report that it was a direct result of COVID. And almost all, 89% of those said that those increases would be permanent. So really significant shifts and sustainable. All indicators indicate that these shifts are very promising as we go forward, just continuing to grow. And so who are the plant-based shoppers? So what you see here is a continuum from omnivores to vegans and vegetarians. So vegans and vegetarians actually make up a pretty small part of the population, about 5%. And so really what we're seeing here is that the flexitarian is about what people identify as flexitarian, meaning that they are actively reducing their meat and dairy intake or only eat it occasionally. And that is now over a third of the population. That's grown 7% in the past 2 years. And when you have such a large group of population, that growth is very significant. So this is really the opportunity. It's more of a mainstream shopper that is learning about plant-based foods, want to learn more, want to purchase them. And it's important that we understand how to communicate and how to support this trend and that shopper. So why do shoppers choose plant-based foods? So we've known for a long time that health, the environment, and sustainability of the environment and animal welfare have been strong drivers, the reasons why people buy plant-based food. And so health is still by far the number one stated reason why people are eating more plant-based foods. As of late, it's more specific in that people are wanting to boost their immunity. But what we're seeing here is that the number two reason stated is that it tastes good, which is really exciting to see because of all of the incredible innovation that's taking place on both, improving taste and texture, which is absolutely mandatory. I mean, why do we buy food? Because it tastes good. So it's critically important that innovation continues to support this. So we're very excited to see those results. And with regard to sustainability in the environment, that reason for choosing plant-based foods was the fastest growing reason over the past year. And then when asked the top 3 reasons for eating plant-based foods more often, better for the environment as a response, you can see it significantly increases as we look at the generations from baby boomer to Gen Z. We know that millennials and Gen Z, they make up 30 and 32% of the population respectively, massive group of demographic that is highly engaged in plant-based foods, really fueling the growth. So a huge opportunity and very important to pay attention to. They buy not only based on health, but very much so for sustainability and animal welfare. And I'm sure we've all seen the massive growth in fast food. Over 120,000 outlets now offer a plant-based food option. And this really helps with trial. Retailers view this as actually something positive because it allows for trial. It's prepared, so there's takes the guesswork out of preparation. It tastes good. And we are still finding that price is a barrier, both at retail and in food service. But as plant-based foods continue to gain scale, as they are, we anticipate that price will continue to decline. And innovation, more about innovation. So plant-based dairy is growing significantly through innovation. Almond milk is still the #1 plant-based milk, but oat milk was introduced a little over 2 years ago and has grown significantly, very quickly. Is now the #2 plant-based milk, surpassing soy milk as the #2. Total share, or the growth rate, excuse me, of plant-based milk has, it's 4 times the growth as it was last year. This, again, these are numbers through the fall of this year. So for such a large part of plant-based food to be growing that rapidly, and that is due to innovation. Now we've talked about oat milk, there's coconut, of course, and flax and chia, sesame, pistachio, cashew, hazelnut, walnut, pea, hemp. I mean, there's just so many different ingredients that are used for plant-based milk. And now we're starting to see a lot of fortification with protein and calcium, omega-3s, and now we're seeing keto milk with MCT oil. So just a lot of room to continue to build an established part of plant-based foods. And plant-based cheese is growing significantly. It's what often is referred to as the last frontier when talking about adopting a plant-based food diet, just because it's hard to replicate, but we're seeing fantastic products that taste and act just like cheese. And again, tremendous growth. We're seeing it made from nuts and legumes, coconut, even sweet potatoes. So just a lot of really exciting developments. And again, I'm really happy to be here, and I'll turn it over to Carl now to talk about our project in domestic sourcing.
Thanks so much, Julie. If we could go to the next slide. Julie has really laid out the incredible growth of the plant-based foods industry. And one of the things that we learned kind of early on, really about mid-year last year, in conversations with PBFA member companies, is that the majority of the ingredients that are used in plant-based foods are actually made from crops grown and or processed outside the US. This was something that we didn't know. We were a little shocked. And when you look at what are the major ingredients used in the production of plant-based foods, soy, of course, no surprise there, in all its various forms, whole, flour, textured, protein concentrate, isolate, dry yellow peas, growing very, very fast. Actually, the growth of soy is very slow. The growth of dry yellow peas is very fast as an ingredient. Another up and coming ingredient, chickpeas. And then gluten, wheat gluten, is actually a very traditional plant-based protein used in a lot of meat substitutes and other plant-based foods. And then finally, oats. And we're actually going to talk quite a bit about oats here in a moment. And the interesting thing for Minnesota is that all of these ingredients are northern crops. Minnesota really has a big opportunity here to grow these ingredients for the fast-growing plant-based foods industry. And if we can begin to turn this around to enable companies to depend less on imported ingredients and more on domestically sourced ingredients, what we're really doing is we're providing a wider range of profitable crop opportunities for farmers. And what that can mean in terms of sustainability is more diverse rotations. And we all know the impacts that more diverse rotations can have on soil health. Soil health, of course, is the big topic in agriculture today. And we believe that plant-based ingredients can contribute to developing more robust soil health on the farm. Next slide, please. So what we decided, let's make this happen. Let's turn it around. Let's see if we can begin to transition away from depending on foreign grown and processed ingredients and more on domestic. And this really is an opportunity for American farmers, many of whom are looking for more opportunities. They're looking to diversify away from what they've been doing, not sure where to go. What we're doing right now is recruiting plant-based food brands to start domestic sourcing of ingredients. The role of PBFA really is as a connector in the process. We're providing sourcing and guidance. We're not signing contracts with farmers and processors and brands. Those contracts will be signed among the businesses involved as we help them create unique supply chains that are specific to their business. One of the things we want to remember as we're going through this is that this is a consumer-driven phenomenon. And for a long time, farmers in a way were isolated from the consumer, but that's changing. One of the big changes that we're starting to see is the brand-farmer connection, where brands actually are developing relationships with farmers, where they're able to specify what crops they want grown, how they want them grown, and finally, in what form the ingredients are delivered to them. The next slide, please. Next. So early on in PBFA's domestic sourcing initiative, we were asked by members of the ag community, including AURI's Jen Wagner-Lahr, what is the size of the opportunity for American farmers? And to be honest, we didn't have an answer. I mean, we had plenty of retail sales data for plant-based foods, but how to connect that to farm level demand? That was the challenge. So we went out searching for experts to help us, agricultural economists who may have some experience in this. And we were very fortunate to meet Dr. Gary Schnitke, professor at University of Illinois, who working in the corn and the soybean industry primarily, had some experience in this area of taking retail data and expressing it in terms of farm level demand in acres. So working with Dr. Schnitke and his team, we came up with a methodology for estimating the number of acres required to produce certain ingredients for certain categories of plant-based foods. Next slide, please. So what we're doing today is giving you a little bit of a preview of something that we're actually going to release on April 6th, next week. But what we want to do is give you a taste of that, of what it's going to be. And we're going to focus on one ingredient. We developed a method for translating retail sales data to farm level demand in acres for a number of crops. But today we'll focus on oats. And one of the reasons for focusing on oats is just the incredible explosive growth of oat milk. You heard what Julie had to say about that growth. It's phenomenal. And the fact that, you know, oat milk is now the #2 non-dairy milk. And at the current rate of growth, it would not surprise me at all if in the next couple of years, it moves into the #1 spots. And this is going to create a lot more demand for oats. So let's take a look here at what Dr. Schnitsky and his team at the University of Illinois were able to develop for us. So, you know, let's kind of look at a little bit of history of oats in the United States. You can see this trend line here goes down, 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 down. Oats used to be a very important crop in the United States. Today, not so much. And the majority of oats that are grown in the oats are really grown for forage. These days, it's becoming an increasingly popular cover crop. But again, it'll either be rolled back into the soil or used for animal feed. In the last 5 years, the average acreage of oats in the US was 896,000 acres. And that really is very, very tiny proportion of farmland acreage devoted to row crops. I mean, 0.3%. That's not a lot. Oats have actually become a specialty grain. Where the primary use now is in producing food grade products such as oatmeal, Cheerios, those kinds of things. And as we see now with the explosive growth of oat milk, plant-based dairy products. So let's have the next slide. So oat yields, because of, better varieties of oats, more sophisticated growing practices, oat yields actually been increasing fairly steadily over time. Of course, yields vary by area. You know, more productive areas can produce huge amounts of oats per acre, 90 bushels, for example. I've heard actually in Washington State, some farmers can produce 150 to 200 bushels an acre, but those are outliers. That's the exception. Like all agricultural product, oats have large yield swings from one area to the next and from season to season, depending on weather, pests, other conditions. But the trend estimate that Dr. Schnitke and his team came up with is 66.6 bushels per acre for 2021. Next. So, when you look at how oats are grown and then finally used in the production of oat milk, you have to go through a number of steps. And the first step is going from oats as they come off the field to oat groats, okay? And to create an oat groat, you clean the oats, you dry them in the kiln, you grade them according to test weight, size, so forth. You take off the hulls, and you separate out the groats from that. So now each pound of oats harvested from the field will produce about 80% groats, 20% secondary materials such as hulls. And so the estimate for the number or the amount of groats per acre, oat groats per acre, is 1,758 pounds per acre. So that's our next step in calculating how much oats we need to make oat milk. So let's take a look at the next step. So here's the money slide. Without this, we really would be unable to do this calculation. And it was actually quite challenging. Oat milk contains about 10% oat groats. And very interestingly, none of the brands were very forthcoming about that. You know, they regard that type of information as proprietary, or at least something they want to keep as a trade secret. So we had to do quite a bit of digging and cajoling and so forth to get the information that oat milk contains about 10% oat groats. Okay. Now, a fluid ounce of oat milk weighs 0.0672 pounds. And it's actually, very interestingly, it's the same as milk, same as dairy milk. Using the calculation on the right, we learned that to make a gallon of oat milk, you need 0.8602 pounds of groats. So 0.8602 pounds of groats per gallon of oat milk. Okay, next step. So given that we get on average 1,758 pounds of groats per acre, what that means is that we can get 4,087 gallons of oat milk from an acre of oats. Okay, next step. Oh, now this is where we use the retail sales data, having established the previous parameters, that for the 52-week period ending in September 6, 2020, oat milk was reported to have retail sales of around $213 million. At retail, the average price of a gallon of oat milk is $14. And so the table on the right shows us the estimated acres needed to meet oat milk demand. So we're looking at, for that date and for that amount of retail sales, 7,459.27 acres. Okay, so now in the scheme of things, you think, is that all? 7,000 acres? Well, think about it. Think about the rate of growth of oat milk that Julie was telling us about earlier, and realize how quickly this is going to expand just in the next few years. In fact, next week, April 6th, we're going to be announcing our final 2020 retail sales data. And just the increase that that's going to represent, we'll see that the number of acres will increase from this number approximately 26% to over 9,000 acres. So this is just a few months differential. Based on a few months growth, you're going from 7,500 acres to 9,000 acres. Well, imagine in a year from now, imagine 5 years from now, this is going to start to be very significant. And with this tremendous rate of growth, it's imperative that we begin our dialogue with American farmers now. And now that we have a tool for estimating how many acres are going to be needed to meet demand, I think we're in a good position to really help those farmers and brands begin to make business decisions. Next slide, please. So we'll share some conclusions that we've made here. Julie and I will both share them. But we believe that as the plant-based food category, as Julie said, grows at retail, it will become a significant opportunity for U.S. agriculture. And now, with a method to calculate potential demand in terms of acres, the plant-based industry can build relationships with American farmers. And, you know, as we mentioned earlier, in terms of sustainability, more crop opportunities means more diverse rotations, promoting soil health. And so, you know, we're going to continue to build bridges between the plant-based foods industry and American agriculture as we move forward with our domestic sourcing initiative. Julie, would you like to add any other points to that?
Actually, no.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful job. Beautiful job. It's very exciting. Very exciting.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And we've never done this before on a webinar, but I'm going to have you go back to slide 22 or 23, where you were talking, Carl, about the per acre numbers. We had one question that said it was a little confusing for them. There were two different numbers for the per acre slide. And
Okay.
I don't know if you can find that, if you could clarify that for them a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that's probably a typo on my part. I believe that I can go back to the original numbers from Dr. Schnitke and his team and correct that. What I was doing is going back through all this and recalculating based on more recent sales numbers. And I think I screwed up a little bit and had two numbers there. As to which number we should go with, I honestly can't say until I go back to the original slides from Dr. Schnitke. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Thanks for trying. Julie, during your presentation, there was a question about PBFA's representation in Codex or the International Organization of Standardization. Do you have representation at either of those places?
We don't actually. It's something that we're exploring internationally, excuse me. So we actually had our new CEO start this week. And so we're looking forward to building additional partnerships, but at this time we do not.
Carl, are you working directly with farmers?
Yes, we are. We're working with individual farmers and also farmer groups. It's very interesting that in certain regions, farmers with similar goals or worldviews, we could say, are banding together to create sort of more economic power, just as we did with farm cooperatives in the 1930s. I can cite one example, a group of oat farmers in central Illinois who are growing organically. They have collectively gotten a gluten-free certification. You know, as we know, oats are already gluten-free, but to get the certification, you have to have a clean supply chain where there's no possibility of contamination by gluten-containing sources. And they're building their own milling capacity, also a certified gluten-free facility. So yes, and some farmers are very excited about this opportunity. Other farmers want to wait and see. But you know, even right now, we have more than enough farmers wanting to work with plant-based food brands than we have brands who really are ready to get on board. So the rate of acceptance among farmers is actually surprisingly fast.
And we have more farmer type questions, and we're going to get to those. But I'm going to piggyback on your just the comments that you just made, because we do have a question asking what role organics play in the plant-based industry.
Yeah, the plant-based brands represent a very wide spectrum of propositions, all the way from as organic and regenerative as you can possibly imagine, all the way through to as conventional as you could possibly imagine, and everything in between. Some brands will emphasize social justice, economic justice parameters, others certain environmental parameters, others growing methods such as organic and regenerative, and in some cases even biodynamic. And then some brands at the other end of the discussion are just purely mass market conventional ingredients. So organic has a place, particularly among smaller brands. Although I will tell you that a couple of very, very big national brands are, as they're beginning to make contracts with their ingredient suppliers and up the chain to farmers, are specifying at the beginning of the contract that the farmer should initiate the 3-year transition to organic. So I find that very significant.
Back to opportunities for the farmers to grow oats for the oat milk market. Is a special variety of oat required? What are some of the parameters there?
Yeah, it's actually a challenge right now. You know, with climate change, the kind of latitude at which you can successfully grow oats that have a food grade test weight seems to be moving more north. That's why so many of our oats are coming from Canada. And some very good research has been done at University of Minnesota by your very own Joe Heuschel to develop varieties of oats that perform better in warmer weather. Oats are traditionally a cool, damp weather crop, but there are varieties out there that will perform better in drier, warmer weather. And so I think that's a really important initiative that the plant-based foods industry is going to want to support.
Have a lot of the sourcing been done in foreign countries only because we had limited production here? Is that?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Does PBFA have a position on GMOs inside of the plant-based food world?
I'll throw that over to you, Julie, because I don't think we do.
We do not. You're correct. We do not.
Yeah.
Okay. AOCS has experience and representation with the Codex and groups related to plant proteins. It's just somebody that was offering some help there. I'm sorry. What country are crops used in plant-based products coming from now?
Well, I'll give you a very interesting example. This is with wheat gluten. We're working with a brand. It's a PBFA member brand that uses wheat gluten as its primary plant-based protein. And it buys all of its wheat gluten from Australia. You think, you know, Australia, I mean, that's so far away. Well, it turns out that it's a lot cheaper to manufacture wheat gluten in Australia than it is to manufacture it in the United States. And there's a number of factors. We actually got a real education in the economics of wheat gluten in this project. One is that, you know, for every pound of wheat gluten you produce, you have 4 pounds of wheat starch. Now, in the US, there's a very limited secondary market for wheat starch. We don't use wheat starch that much in food processing. Well, it turns out that in Asia, particularly China, South Korea, Japan, wheat starch is actually a moderately valuable ingredient. It's used in the production of many different types of noodles there. So Australia has a closer to hand secondary market for wheat starch than gluten processors in the United States do. Therefore, they can sell the wheat gluten at a lower price. Another example, I could go on, but one other really interesting example is that you'll have yellow dry peas grown in the upper Midwest and in the prairie provinces of Canada, shipped to China, processed into protein, concentrates and isolates, and then shipped back to the United States as an ingredient to then be used in manufacturing plant-based foods. I mean, on the face of it, that just seems totally insane, but the reason is limited processing capability here. That is changing. Industry is stepping up. For example, Ingredion just opened a pea protein processing facility in South Sioux City, Nebraska, and which is really going to improve domestic supplies of pea protein.
Is the current, corn and soybean markets have rallied again. Does that put pressure on trying to get farmers to make this pivot to some of these plants that you're going to need for your plant-based foods?
Of course, short-term price changes always change the calculus on farm, don't they? But, you know, if you're looking out a little bit more ahead, if you want to be able to insulate yourself from the ups and downs of the commodity market, you really do want to think about diversifying. And that's just plain business, whether it's a farm or whether it's a stock brokerage or a automobile manufacturer. You don't want to depend on one or two products. You really need to diversify your product range in order to create long-term stability. So it's just as true for farm economics as it is for any other business.
We do have a question that's more of a comment about including some thoughts about food as medicine and orchard and fruit sectors, but I think we'll save that for you, Carl, and you can maybe answer that one personally to them. Farmers in Minnesota, it says here, have a lot of experience growing beans, so it feels like chickpeas and yellow peas could be a good fit for this region. What's the scale of opportunity to start growing more of that?
Oh, absolutely. And in North and South Dakota, also huge pulse growing regions. I'll just give you another really interesting example of that. There's a lot of innovation going on in pulses. I had mentioned peas and chickpeas, but also there are several brands now that are using lupini beans. I mean, I would imagine a lot of folks, you know, tuned into today's webinar have not even heard of lupini beans, yet a couple of these companies are contracting with farmers in Michigan, actually right now, to grow lupini beans as their primary protein source for their products. So I think you're going to see huge amounts of innovation in the coming years around a wide variety of pulses. And the good news for Minnesota and other upper Midwest states is that this is the ideal region to be growing those.
Any research on using ethanol co-products in plant-based foods?
Well, actually, one of the things that we looked at in this project with the wheat gluten for this particular PBFA member brand was using the waste the waste wheat starch in ethanol. A lot of the plants are already tooled for corn, so they would have to invest something to successfully use wheat starch to create ethanol. But there are places in the world where, wheat starch is actually being used on a fairly regular basis in ethanol production. So I think there's some potential there.
And looking around corners a little bit, and this could be for either of you, what are you seeing coming next?
Julie, I think that's a great one for you.
I think to your point, Carl, there are many different grains and I know there's many different nuts that are being used now, paleo nuts and tiger nuts and different types of nuts that are available as well. We actually have just invested a pretty significant amount of resources into Mintel data that will allow us to start now digging in and researching what's happening globally, specifically with ingredients. So we really look forward to publishing that very soon.
Does the consumer research that PBFA is doing show them having any interest in identifying preserved products, knowing where their products were grown? Is direct marketing by farmers to consumers something that PBFA is looking at?
Well, I'll answer part of that, and then I'll let Judith answer the other. I'm going to answer the second part of it first, is that actually just in the last week and a half in discussions with Midwest farmers, we began looking at opportunities for direct consumer sales by farmers creating their own brands, packaging their products on farm and shipping directly to consumers, getting on online platforms such as Amazon.com, Walmart.com, and so forth, and really bypassing the whole traditional supply chain. And we've got a couple of farmers who are very excited about that. But as far as the other consumer insights, I'll defer to Julie on that.
Actually, Carl, I think you covered it, and then you might need to ask me the question again. I'm covering a couple different chats here.
Yeah, the first part of that question.
Well, we're up to the end here, so or getting close to the end. We have a question here about how many acres would be required for soy-based products. You done any research there?
Right. We didn't calculate soy, despite Dr. Schnittke's vast experience in the field of soy. And the reason we did that is that soy really has its act together. There's no problem with domestic sourcing of soy, either in whole form, crushed, the protein products of soy. It's all there. The processing is all there. We just didn't see that soy needed any of our help.
All right. And for
I
the
wanted to say a
report,
couple things, Dan. Do you mind if I interrupt? Yeah, there's a question that came in about what PBFA does to support entrepreneurs in this space. We conducted member solutions calls at the beginning of the pandemic to provide a very solid network of companies that could support each other at the beginning, just really to understand how to survive, to get the proper resources from the government, how to keep their employees safe. And that has evolved into something that now we have continued. And obviously we're still here, but it is evolved into bringing in experts. Carl, you talked about online, and I meant to do that earlier. Thank you. There's just been such a tremendous shift to online, and how can our members respond to that? And it's very expensive to ship perishable foods, but we brought in experts across the industry to help explain that and share insights and ways to do that for our members. So just a very large array of different experts to help emerging brands succeed. We also provide the ability, in the absence of in-person meetings and trade shows, a lot of the emerging brands had no way to meet with retailers. So we actually facilitated that by working with Plant-Based World to provide virtual meetings. Over 100 meetings took place, very strong connections, distribution. So we're very, very supportive of entrepreneurs. And we were about to launch an event at the end of last year, scaling up an entire event dedicated to this. So a lot of energy around that. I did want to say, going back to the question about the calculations, I just want to say that it was my fault that we weren't able to share the information that's being published in a press release last week. So I just wanted to acknowledge that Carl had to respond at the very last minute with some calculations. So Carl, the 9,000 number was solid, right? Like, I mean, that's something that it wasn't that far off, but I just needed to throw that in there.
There's some people interested in your report that's coming out on the 6th. How can we make sure that we're signed up to get it? Is it through your newsletter, or just check back on your website? Where will that information be shared? And will it be shared with the attendees today?
Absolutely. So our website is a great place, and then you can contact me directly. You can just send me an email and I'll make sure you get it.
Perfect. And then I'm going to go back to a question that I passed on earlier, and I'm just going to read it verbatim. It says, Carl, thanks for your comment about encouraging plant-based ag in Minnesota. May I ask you to extend this to the orchard and fruit sector, such as apples, because functional beverages are also growing alongside the concept of food as medicine. Fruits are a big part of this. As an owner of a beverage company, Panache, I'm interested in encouraging cider varietals with table varietals of apples. This helps cross-pollination and encourages a sustainable orchard. Any plans in this direction?
Well, that's a great question. It's a really interesting kind of forward-looking question. At present, we have a relatively narrow definition of what constitutes plant-based foods, as Julie described in some of her earlier slides. And so with fruits and products made from fruits, it's actually not something that the plant-based foods industry is tracking, despite the obvious fact that fruits are plants. And one of the initiatives for the coming year is to actually revisit the definition of what is a plant-based food to see if whether we can have a bigger tent. to bring more companies, more aspects of the agriculture industry into the plant-based foods arena. But at present, we just, we don't deal with fruits, and nothing against fruits. They're truly plant-based, but they're not part of how the industry currently defines itself.
Very good. And this really is going to be the last question. Julie, can you share with this webinar participants the events where you brought together food growers with retailers and distributors?
We were a part of Grow North. Carl, would that qualify for that question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Food Ag Ideas Week was the most recent event where we brought growers and brands and other, participants in the value chain together to talk about our domestic sourcing initiative.
We're definitely excited to be more a part of this.
Yes,
Continue.
very much so.
Well, Julie and Carl, we are out of time, but I want to thank you for being with us today on Fields of Innovation, and thanks for your time and your presentation.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And that concludes AURI Connects Fields of Innovation for today, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. Join AURI Connects Fields of Innovation on April 30th for a program that we're calling Into the Field, Developing Minnesota's Future Ag Innovators. We'll be welcoming ag educators and students to learn more about why young people in Minnesota are pursuing careers in agriculture, the opportunities that are available to them, and how ag education programs are working to prepare students to succeed in this dynamic and rapidly evolving industry. Ag education is thriving in Minnesota, with over 200 ag education programs and 300 ag educators serving over 21,000 students in communities both urban and rural. So join us April 30th as we learn more about how agricultural education and FFA are preparing the next generation of agriculture, food, and natural resource innovators. We also, of course, welcome your feedback on our programs, so please respond when we send you an evaluation. And thank you for participating today. And remember to visit the Fields of Innovation Facebook page. For more information on Fields of Innovation or any of the work that AURI is involved in, you can go to auri.org.